Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and today we're going to be deep diving into the book Nzeogwu by Olusegun Obasanjo. This is one of those books I've been trying to get my hands on for a very long time, and the other day I was just walking through my bookstore and it was just right there, so I decided to pick one up and share with you, my viewers. So, for those of you who have been living under a rock, Kaduna Nzeogwu was a major in the Nigerian army who led the failed coup of January 15th, 1966. I've done several videos about him on this channel, so you might want to look that up. But yeah, so Olusegun Obasanjo did a book about him. It was published in 2000. It was first published in 1987 and then republished again in 2022. By the Presidential Library Foundation. So I'm going to be diving right into the book. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. I'll leave a link in the description where you can buy the book. So without further ado, this is the Finding Nzeogwu series based on the book Nzeogwu by Olusegun Obasanjo. The mutual dependence on one another for survival in war helps to promote a sense of camaraderie, if not brotherhood, among military officers of about the same seniority and age, more than is probably true of other professions. Chukwuma, Kaduna, Nzeogwu and I were genuine and close friends who shared a similarity of outlook on many subjects. Our friendship was further cemented by our loneliness, a common adversary, and the danger we faced during military operations in the Congo when law and order broke down in that unhappy country shortly after her independence. We were idealistic young men inspired by the mood of nationalism that was sweeping through many parts of Africa at that time, and as young army officers, we freely discussed the future of the Nigerian army, Nigeria and Africa, and the condition of the black man in the world. We were not satisfied with the second-class status that he had almost everywhere, including the continent of his birth. We believed then, just as I do now, that the black man everywhere had to struggle and indeed fight to break the shackles of oppression and exploitation and to lift himself above the subhuman level he had been kept for so long. We were convinced that the black man's burden would only be lightened by good leadership, sweat and blood, and not by wishing that others do for him what he desires. All these ideas crystallized in us during our Congo operations. In spite of the exigencies of military service, which put some distance between us after our return from the Congo in May 1961, our friendship continued to deepen and blossom. With Chukwuma in Lagos and I in Kaduna, our exposures, appointments, and responsibilities in the army varied from time to time. We progressed differently, and with maturity came a sense of realism in our outlook and worldview. But we remained steadfast in our commitment to the upliftment of our people and our race. Chukwuma communicated with some of the Angola nationalists and freedom fighters and kept me briefed about the developments in that area. By 1964, the exigencies of military service brought us together again in Kaduna. In Kaduna, as in the Congo, we shared the same house as well as thoughts, hopes, aspirations, and fears for the future of our country and continent. Early in 1965, I followed Chukwuma's footsteps when I proceeded to the Staff College in India, which he himself had attended a year earlier. It was within 48 hours of returning from India that my best and closest friend in the army sprung a surprise, not only on me, but on the whole country, by leading a military coup d'etat that toppled the civilian government of the day. This was on 15 January 1966. So started the first 13 years of military intervention in Nigerian politics, an intervention that nearly ended in a national disaster of disintegration through a civil war. As Providence would have it, the action commenced by my friend Chukwuma was ended through my efforts and that of others when we put an end to Biafra's succession and handed over power to an elected civilian administration. Over the years, I have had time to reflect on Chukwuma's short life, his thoughts, words, and deeds. At the same time, different people have held different views and expressed different opinions about his seemingly enigmatic young army officer who did something dramatic, some say tragic, to bring about a radical change in Nigeria, the most populous black country in the world. I have not set out to praise Chukwuma nor make him a villain. My aim in this little book is to portray Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu as I knew and understood him when we lived and worked together, sharing joys, griefs, thoughts, and ideas. I feel I owe it to Chukwuma and to Nigerian posterity to record what I knew about this idealistic and thoroughly patriotic Nigerian who in his approach to our political problems has been described as exhibiting more enthusiasm and naivety than wisdom or prudence. A book on a man like Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu in a country like Nigeria by someone who has gone through the stages that I have in the military and political life of Nigeria and with the consequent experience cannot but evoke feelings, passions, emotions, and comments. But whatever may be the reader's reaction to Chukwuma's actions and my modest efforts to portray him as I knew him, the reader should bring intelligent and intellectual reflections to bear on Chukwuma's life and attitude and the Nigeria of his dream compared with the Nigeria of his time. This book is written by a soldier about another soldier whose actions had a profound effect on the course of Nigerian history. I consider it important, therefore, to include in this short account a cursory view of the historical evolution of the Nigerian army, which produced both the subject of this book and its author. Biographies of men who have shaped the course of human history have been written all over the world. It is my belief that the lives of Nigerian leaders are no less deserving of critical focus if we are to understand, in its proper perspective, the political problem of our plural society. Attempts to re-examine the lives of those who have made contributions to this country may not only provide better insights, but also offer possible solutions to our many difficulties, which center on the search for possible ways of coexistence in a country torn by ethnic differences, not to talk of greed and selfishness and the new apparent danger of religion. A short biography of this nature can only whet the appetite for more detailed research, and my task would have been fulfilled if this book sparks up the fire of curiosity in any future biographer of Chukwuma's. I accept whatever shortcomings and inadequacies critics may find in this book. I would like to add, though, that none was deliberate. Olusegun Obasanjo, January 1987. James Okafor Nzeogwu, the father of Patrick Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu, was born about 1905 to a peasant farmer by the name of Obi Nzeogwu. Like all African names, which always have meanings peculiar to their places and circumstances, the name Nzeogwu, shortened from Nzeogwu, means if you know how to take care of yourself, people will think you have the medicine to ward off danger. Obi Nzeogwu hailed from Umunoke quarters in Obodogu village, one of the cluster of villages constituting Okpanam in what was then known as Asaba Division in the Igbo-speaking areas of Bendel State, west of the lower Niger River. Life was simple in those days. The lives of the rural folks revolved around what was essentially subsistence agriculture. Each homestead was free to pursue its own activities as long as these activities did not come into conflict with those of neighboring people. Especially the Western Igbo people, of which Obi Nzeogwu was a part, had no paramount rulers and therefore were not subject to arbitrary exactions of tributes and taxes as in other communities in Nigeria, which had powerful kings. What was prevalent in the area were age-grade organizations, titled societies, and marriage alliances, as well as meetings at communal markets, which provided cross-cultural contacts for otherwise fiercely individualistic villages. The lives of the ordinary people remained largely unchanged, especially in peacetime, and peasant farmers busied themselves on their farms. Because of the rigors and demands of their vocation, most farmers married several wives and had several children who provided the labor on the farm. In the case of Obi Nzeogwu, he had 3 wives who were ranked in seniority according to when they were married by their husband. The second wife of Obi Nzeogwu, Okudibechi, was the mother of James Okafor Nzeogwu, Chukwuma's father. Obi Nzeogwu had other children before and after James. Onwudi, Josiah, and Ngbafo were older than James, and Nwolili, Peter, Nku, Nwagbeke, Napoleon, and Agnes were younger. At the time James was born, his father had converted to Christianity, and as a mark of total belief in the new Christian deity, he surrendered to the Catholic missionaries in Asaba, his son James, to be brought up according to the word of God. James Nzeogwu lived with one father, Anthony, at Asaba. He was brought up as a devout Catholic and was educated at the mission's expense with the purpose of making him a priest. He finished his primary education in the 20s, after which he began to search for a job. The general slump in the economy at the time made it difficult for him to secure a job in Onitsha, on the other side of the Niger. The kind of jobs available were in Enugu, and they were the hard and tedious types in the colliery, which he felt unable to do. Lagos was another possibility, but he did not know anybody there. Then he gathered from his friends that clerical jobs were available in northern Nigeria. He had always wanted to travel so as to shake off the dead weight of tradition in his immediate environment and out of the love of adventure. As he had a cousin by the name of Chukwuedu who lived in Kaduna, he thought he would be a good enough place to start. He discussed his plans with Father Anthony, who gave him a testimonial and a letter of introduction to his colleagues in the Catholic mission in Kaduna. James moved to Kaduna as a bachelor and soon made the acquaintance of Father McCarthy, an Irish priest with the Kaduna Roman Catholic Diocese. He stayed with the priest in Kaduna and later traveled with him to Zaria when he was appointed a pupil teacher in one of the Catholic mission schools outside the gates of the old city. James worked diligently and earned a good reputation with his colleagues. Shortly after settling down in Zaria, Father McCarthy again moved to Sokoto and was accompanied by his loyal disciple, James Nzeogwu. After a brief stay in Sokoto, they returned to Kaduna. The constant relocation of the priest did not allow James to develop his interest in the teaching profession, and he told the priest that he wanted to train as a technician. Even though Father McCarthy would have liked him to become a priest, he consented to his wish to be a technician, and in the early 30s, he secured a place for him in what was then the electrical department. James learned fast and he soon completed his apprenticeship and became a machine operator. He was to remain in the Electricity Corporation of Nigeria, ECN, for years, making slow but steady progress as a technician. Elizabeth Ngbeke, Chukwuma's mother, was born in the village of Ugbolu near Okpanam, not too far from James Nzeogwu's place of birth. She was at least 10 years younger than James. Like him, her father was a peasant farmer and her mother eked out a living as a petty trader when not on her husband's farm. According to Igbo customs, Elizabeth was taken to Nzeogwu's house at the age of 10 to be trained for her future role as his wife. In traditional society, where emphasis was placed on chastity, the idea was to catch girls when they were young and bring them up properly. It was usually a family shame if on the day of marriage, a husband discovered that his wife was not a virgin. To prevent this, a girl was moved to the house of her future husband, where she was still a child, to be brought up with the children of the household. When Elizabeth was brought into Obi Nzeogwu's compound, the plan was that she would marry one of the Obi Nzeogwu's other sons rather than James, since there was another young girl living in the Nzeogwu's at the time who was being prepared for marriage to James. In those days, the parties directly involved in a marriage were usually the last to be consulted. Fathers took the liberty to arrange with their friends who their daughters and sons married. James did not like his father's choice for him, and when he left the village in pursuit of Western education, the poor girl had to be returned to her family. When she was old enough, Elizabeth married Peter, James' younger brother, after the necessary obligatory fees had been paid to her parents. A substantial part of the fees had been contributed by Okudibechi, James' mother. Within a year of Elizabeth married to Peter, they had a son, Mark. But soon after the birth of Mark, Peter had an operation to remove his appendix. He later died as a result of complications arising from the operation. Elizabeth thereby became a young widow with an infant son to take care of. After she had completed the mourning ritual for her dead husband, which necessitated her staying home for 2 years, almost in total confinement, then came the issue of who would inherit her. In accordance with Ika Igbo custom, known as Egbulu Nazo, a kind of social security insurance, Elizabeth and her son Mark were sent to James, her late husband's elder brother, in Kaduna. Normally, the widow is asked to choose from among the eligible male members of her husband's family. If her husband had grown-up sons, she would be betrothed to one of them, usually the eldest. But in the case of Elizabeth, one of Peter's brothers was chosen, and the lot of marrying Elizabeth fell on James, Peter's older brother. His mother insisted on it. For having been responsible for the payment of Elizabeth's bride price, she wanted one of her own sons to inherit the property, as it were. According to the tradition of the Igbos, a man cannot inherit his younger brother's wife, but James had to bend to the will of his mother. Eventually, Elizabeth and James were married at St. Joseph Catholic Church in Kaduna in 1936, with most of James' benefactors in the Catholic mission present. Within a month of the marriage, Elizabeth became pregnant. Having been brought up as a hardworking woman, she soon realized that she could not just sit at home as a housewife with 2 mouths to feed and another on the way. The paltry £3 sterling that her husband earned monthly, out of which she was given 6 shillings as housekeeping money, was hardly sufficient. Luckily, she had always maintained good contact with her hometown in Asaba, and she could get palm oil and other raw food items from there which she could sell. The market for this kind of food was considerable in Kaduna, where there was a large population of Southerners working either for the military establishment or for various British mercantile houses as well as the colonial government. Kaduna in those days attracted quite a large immigrant population from all over the country. Located in the predominantly Gwari-speaking areas, it soon attracted from its founding in 1914 people from Hausa land and the south, and by the time Elizabeth got there in 1936, it had developed a cosmopolitan character which it still has up till today. Elizabeth was a very energetic and dedicated housewife. She woke up early to make the house comfortable for her husband. She drove herself very hard even during pregnancy. Being of good health, this did not affect her nor the child. From the proceeds of her trade, she was able to support her husband financially, and for the first few years of the marriage, everything went well. On 26 February 1937, Elizabeth had a male child and he was named Chukwuma. He was later given the name Patrick when he was baptized in the Catholic Church. The neighbors and friends of his parents called him Kaduna, as was with the practice in those days, signifying the fact that he was a native of Kaduna by birth. The child grew up to be proud of the name. At birth, everything about Chukwuma was normal and he grew up to be a likable young child, a favorite with his friends and teachers. There were other children of the marriage, but they died shortly after birth, one after another. Anthony, Stephen, and Oyochukwu, followed by twin girls who died even before they were named. Chukwuma's parents started to feel that there was something wrong with the marriage, or perhaps there was a jinx on the family, and Chukwuma, having no younger brothers and sisters, became remarkably independent and introverted as a child. Even though his half-brother Max lived with them, they never really got on well, perhaps due to the age gap between them. However, the misfortune of losing several children did not undermine the relationship between Chukwuma's parents. On the contrary, it helped them to cement the bond that united the family. Eventually, Elizabeth began to have children again. First, there was Teresa, Susanna, and Josephine, who was born deaf and dumb and was Chukwuma's favorite. She was followed by Philomena, and the last of the children was Peter. As a child, Chukwuma ate well, played hard, and slept very soundly. He did not suffer from any serious illness or disease. By the time he grew up, he was speaking Pidgin English, Igbo, and Hausa fluently. Chukwuma consistently showed his strong will and determination as he grew up. When he fought his playmates, he was always determined and never gave up, even against the bigger boys. He sometimes refused to go to school unless he was given sufficient money to buy food, or in the alternative was provided with food to take to school. He never coveted food brought or bought by any of the more affluent children. Although going to school opened up a new world for Chukwuma, he did not abandon his playmates who did not have the opportunity or the desire to go to school. Some of them remained his lifelong friends. He protected his mother jealously against the occasional abuse by his father. As a young child, he once found his father beating up his mother, and he was so incensed against his father that the old man never lifted so much as a threatening hand to her again. Although he grew up in a profoundly religious environment, Chukwuma was a very practical and realistic person. An incident vividly demonstrated this. He realized that his younger brother Peter had a fear of ghosts. One evening, Chukwuma locked him out of the house, and in spite of his brother's pleas, he wouldn't let him in. When he finally let him in after an hour, he asked, "Have the spirits taken you away?" They hadn't, and that cured Peter's fear of ghosts. Chukwuma was a very inquisitive and precocious child. As a young student in St. Joseph Catholic Primary School, he would ask his teachers endless questions and was not always satisfied with their superficial replies. After the long school hours, he would try out his abilities on other children, making them bend to his wishes. There were a lot of soldiers stationed in Kaduna during the Second World War, and Chukwuma would watch them doing their early morning drill with much interest. Soon he began to gather his little admirers together, and with a rough wooden stick, he would line them up on a parade and shout orders in a high-pitched military fashion. He got through the rigorous drilling in reading, writing, and arithmetic without much of a problem, and the years of carrying a cracked slate eventually paid off as he prepared for secondary school. There were not too many choices in those days. It was unlikely he would be admitted to Barewa College, which was a school for children of the northern elite and was run like an English public school. The population of the school was predominantly Muslim. St. Joseph College, also in Kaduna, was another possibility, but the entrance examination was very competitive. It was conducted throughout the whole of northern Nigeria, but the school hardly admitted more than 60 children at a time, and so a child had to be exceptionally brilliant to get in. Even for children of Catholics, admission was not automatic. His parents also thought of sending him back to Asaba, but Chukwuma was determined to get into St. John's, and so he worked hard and passed the entrance examination in December 1950. He was called for the interview, which he also passed, and he entered the college at the beginning of the new year. Chukwuma's admission number was 164. Christian Anuforo, who was later to become his very close friend, was 134. St. John's College was founded in 1949 through the hard work and foresight of Monsieur John McCarthy, Bishop of Kaduna, and Father John O'Hara. The school started off with a staff of 4, with Father John O'Hara as principal between 1949 and 1953. Father Malachi Morris taught mathematics and English. Father John Murphy taught Latin and science, and Patrick Chidueme, who was the only Nigerian at the time, taught a combination of arts and science subjects. More members were gradually added to these foundation staff, and within 6 years, there were 25 full-time staff, 12 of whom were Nigerian. The campus was beautifully spread out on a hill overlooking the rest of the generally flat topography of neighboring Kaduna to the west. South of the campus was Ungwa Rimi village, a small farming community, and over to the north was the race course, which was also used as a golf course by the colonial masters. East of the college was the Kaduna River. In those days, the college had few buildings and even fewer trees to serve as windbreakers during the harsh Harmattan months between November and March. There was pipe-borne water but no electricity, and the school had several paraffin lamps which lit up the dark nights. The school's motto, Lucena Lucens, the shining torch, was therefore very appropriate. The classroom block was a long, low building of 12 classrooms which housed 2 arms of forms 1 to 6 and an assembly hall. Next to it were houses for the principal and other Irish fathers. The African members of staff lived a little further off. There were 4 dormitories named after Catholic saints: Augustine, Benedict, Clement, and Cyprian, a laboratory block, and a chapel which occupied pride of place in the college. The considerable missionary input in St. John's meant a strong emphasis on discipline and religion. In many ways, it was like a seminary. Life for the student was highly regimented. He had to wake up at 6 a.m., tidy up and go to mass, after which there was general cleaning, breakfast, and at 8, the roll call and morning assembly. Then classes began and went on till 1 in the afternoon when lunch was served. Lunch was usually a brisk affair because they had to get back for the 2 o'clock service in the chapel, followed by siesta. Afternoon prep lasted from 4 till 6. There were games between 6 and 7, then short prayers before dinner and night prep, after which there were prayers again and lights out. Nobody dared miss any part of this strict schedule. For day students, the situation was only slightly different, as many of them had to stay in school till after games in the evening. Chukwuma's class was the 3rd set in the school, and in January 1951, there were 65 of them, which was an unusually large number by St. John's standards. Most of the students were of southern Nigerian origin, with a few northerners, particularly from southern Zaria. The students related to each other without any thoughts or differences in ethnic origin. Many of them were born in the north and were familiar with the culture. Chukwuma was from a very humble home, and his parents could only afford the £11 fee paid by day students, as against the £33 which he would have to pay as a boarder. This of course meant that Chukwuma could not participate fully in the activities of the college as his father would have wished. The elder Nzeogwu found a way around this problem when he approached Hyacinth Odigwe, one of the younger teachers in the school, and persuaded him to allow Chukwuma to live with him on the campus. The way the Nzeogwus succeeded in finding a place on campus for Chukwuma showed how practical and trusting they were. Hyacinth Odigwe, even though barely 18 years old himself and with only a secondary school education, became Chukwuma's guardian and was ultimately adopted by the Nzeogwus. When Chukwuma's father approached the young teacher, whom he had never met until then, Odigwe was naturally apprehensive at first, but relaxed when, on probing, he found the elder Nzeogwu to be a devoted and pious Catholic. He told him not to expect any luxuries for his son because he had none. There were only hard beds and a few wooden chairs in the house. Chukwuma's guardian shared a duplex bungalow with one of the other teachers, Thaddeus Chukwueke, and his family. Odigwe's younger sister and brother, Luke, who lived with him, shared the household chores with Chukwuma. But young Chukwuma was spared the ordeal of going to the bush to fetch firewood, being slightly older than Luke and his sister, who were still in primary school. Chukwuma was a rather stubborn and self-willed boy, so his father gave his new guardian the latitude to discipline him as he saw fit. Odigwe belonged to the old school, which believed that if you spared the rod, you would spoil the child. He was a strict disciplinarian and flogged Luke and his sister, as well as Chukwuma, for any misdemeanor, no matter how minor. Chukwuma felt that his guardian was sometimes too strict, especially with Luke. Once, Chukwuma got Luke to write a protest letter to his father to complain about what he considered Odigwe's maltreatment of the young boy. Chukwuma wrote an accompanying letter elaborating on what Luke had said. Nothing came of their protest, but this did not stop Chukwuma from sometimes challenging his guardian if he felt aggrieved or withdrawing for days into a shell. His father, who visited him often, would plead with his son to have patience and accept life the way it was. Now that Chukwuma lived on campus, he was able to participate in activities which boarders enjoyed, while being spared the humiliation of fagging. Sometimes he would leave home, even foregoing his food, in order to be present either at prep or at games. On one occasion, his guardian prevented him from going for sports until he had finished his own part of the domestic chores. Chukwuma did what in those days was considered a very unusual thing. He confronted his guardian and accused him of high-handedness in his decision and action. Even at this stage, Chukwuma had developed strong opinions about many things. He was a good observer of people. He would comment, for example, about the petty quarrels of the Chukwuekes, the couple who lived next door. At home, as at school, he was obsessed with cleanliness. He swept his half of the compound religiously and insisted on the Chukwueke boys doing the same. He washed his white school uniform conscientiously and would take a long time ironing it with a heavy charcoal iron. At school, Chukuma never tried to ingratiate himself with any of his teachers or even his guardian. Hyacinth Udigwe remembers that he never came home with tales of what other students said about the teachers behind their backs. He thought it unbecoming and degrading to be a tale bearer. On one occasion, though, Chukuma disclosed to his guardian that he suspected that his friend's sudden academic success was not genuine. Christian Anuforo had apparently connived with a young clerk from his hometown to change his examination marks, and the usually average Christian ended up at the top of the class. Chukuma knew his friend's limitations and was not convinced by his excellent performance. True to character, Chukuma confronted his friend who denied prior knowledge of the clerk's action, explaining that he may have done it out of affection for him. The matter was subsequently reported to the school authorities, who found the clerk guilty and dismissed him, exonerating Christian. Not only did this incident not affect Chukuma's relationship with Christian, but it helped to endear him to his teachers, as the school had made discipline and uprightness the hallmark of its system. 3 years after Chukuma had been in the school, his guardian was admitted into the University of Ibadan, and he was faced with the option of either going to live with his parents in town or becoming a boarder. He wanted to go to boarding house, and his father agreed that this was a better idea, as moving back to his parents was likely to affect his academic progress. The old man saw his investment in his son's education as an insurance against old age and his eventual retirement. He would tell Chukuma an old African proverb: "When the bush rat becomes old, it feeds on the milk from the breast of its offspring." He was prepared to make a few more sacrifices to enable his son to complete his education. Chukuma was in Form 3 by the time he moved into the boarding house. The rigorous life in the boarding house was no longer a novelty, for while he lived with Hyacinth Udigwe, he had voluntarily subjected himself to a strict regime. Now he only had to forego the regular visits from his father and brother. When Chukuma got to the senior class, he had a lot of influence on the junior boys. He was obsessed with fitness and gave himself the task of conducting sports and exercises. He got up at 5 every morning, even during the Hamatan, and would wake everybody in his dormitory for prayers, which he sometimes conducted. They would then go out to the field for physical training. He got on the nerves of some of his classmates who sometimes wanted to sleep a bit longer. His colleagues used to wonder at his energy. Even in the afternoon, when it was unbearably hot for most people, he would be doing push-ups and countless laps around the field. During physical training, Chukuma would scream and bellow orders at students. He never tolerated sloppiness nor laziness. He was nicknamed Major for his soldier-like behavior. Most of his classmates believed that there was no other place for him to work after school except in the army. One of his classmates, remarking about Chukuma's unusual habits, said,
How will you view the action of a Lone Ranger student who regularly ran around the school playing field 10 to 20 times all by himself and did 40 to 50 press-ups immediately after?
On account of his love for individual events, his friends would refer to him as a one-man team. He was not a member of St. John's famous soccer team, but he represented the school in discus and javelin. He also had a keen interest in boxing. It was his love for physical exertions which first brought out the rebel in Chukuma. The school's training instructor was unpopular with students because he was thought to be high-handed. Chukuma organized a boycott of all sporting activities until the instructor changed his attitude. This incident brought him to the attention of the authorities. Coupled with this was the fact that he seemed to encourage waywardness in the juniors. He was opposed to fagging and usually took the side of the younger boys against the bullying seniors. He was further estranged from the Irish fathers when it was time for prefects to be chosen from his class. He was not amongst those selected. They turned a blind eye to his leadership qualities, preferring boys who were more docile. The only outlets for his ability to discipline and control others were the sports field and the dining room where he was the table head. The table head was usually a senior boy whose role was to control the affairs of his table at mealtimes. Chukwuma was very strict, insisting on proper table manners, decorum, and silence while eating. Boys were not to chew their food noisily, and forks and knives were to be properly used. He also saw to the equitable distribution of the food, never allowing the older boys to take advantage of the younger ones. Dressing properly was another of Chukwuma's obsessions. His uniform was always immaculate, and in order to keep the collar of his white shirt, he would place a sheet of paper between the back of his neck and the shirt. Even on the sports field, he made sure that his shorts and vests were always as clean as they could possibly be. Chukwuma's enthusiasm for discipline and propriety did not, however, extend to his schoolwork. He was weak in mathematics and the sciences, but good in what he described as the reading subjects: literature, geography, Latin, history, and religious knowledge. His guardian felt that if he had driven himself as hard as his studies as he did in sports, he would probably have been better than the average student that he was. He seemed to expend his intellectual energy on books that were not of immediate relevance to his studies. Ben Akbati, who was a year his junior, remembers that he was fond of giving lectures on Marshal Tito and his guerrilla activities in Yugoslavia during the Nazi era. His classmates were surprised by his broad knowledge at a time when the average secondary school child did not read much else beyond the prescribed texts. But Chukwuma spent long hours in the library, immersed in the stories of famous people. He was familiar with the biographies of Arthur Wellesley, Robert Clive, George Washington, William Pitt, Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. Aside from Christian Anuforo, Chukwuma did not have many friends. Many of his classmates thought him rather eccentric. His clean-shaven head did not help matters. Many of his friends had girlfriends in neighboring schools, but Chukwuma was never seen with any particular girl and was always uncomfortable in the company of the opposite sex. During the holidays, when his friends had parties and invited girls from the sister school, Chukwuma would not go, and if he did, he would refuse to dance. His brother Peter recalls that Chukwuma's strict Catholic upbringing and beliefs did not allow for any close relationship with women outside marriage, hence his usual attitude towards women. In spite of his physical fitness, he seldom got into fights. His aggression seemed internally directed, and he had the enormous ability to control his emotion. He tried to be as fair as possible and was always very protective of the weak. One of his classmates remarked that Chukwuma was the type of person one did not forget easily. He was the rare type, once in a lifetime kind of person in a school. He lived strictly according to the school rules, and he was feared and admired at the same time. He was really a no-nonsense student who hated injustice. Chukwuma and his friend Christian sometimes went hunting with the Irish fathers, but he disliked, as a matter of principle, the favoritism that often showed towards certain students. They would shower them with gifts and even go as far as awarding them extra marks. Chukwuma did not hesitate to show his strong disapproval. He did not associate with students who curried favors. His friends were usually the more athletic, rugged, and independent-minded type. Although Chukwuma sometimes had problems with the Irish fathers, it was through them that he met the British Army officers who visited the school from time to time and who kindled his interest in the military. From then on, in spite of protestations from his parents and the bishop, he was determined on a career in the army. Many of his juniors who admired him a great deal later followed in his footsteps and joined the army. One of them, E.N. Nwobosi, who idolized Chukwuma, was in fact nicknamed Junior Major by his classmates. Chukwuma had hoped to finish at the St. John without a hitch and then go on to join the military school, but the rebel in him was brought out again just a few months before he was due to take the final examinations. Having already warned him, the authorities were not prepared to give him a second hearing. The school started and operated a syllabus on the basis of 6 years for school certificates. The first intake spent 6 years and took the school certificates examination in 1954. But as a result of the school authorities feeling their way for changing to a 5-year school certificate syllabus, they allowed 7 out of the second intake to attempt school certificate examinations with the first intake in 1954. Those 7 left school with the first intake, thereby saving 1 year. The third intake, which was Chukwuma's set, hoped that some above average students in their class would be allowed to join the second intake in 1955 to attempt the school certificate examination as was done in the previous year. They all worked very hard to place among the first 10 in class in the hope of gaining 1 year. But the authorities did not allow a single student from the third intake to attempt the school certificate examination with the rest of the school intake in 1955. And what was more, in 1956, the school authorities asked some of the fourth intake to write their school certificate examination papers with the third intake. Chukwuma led a protest of his entire class, and the authorities reacted by suspending all the students of the third intake, now in their final year. With the final examination a few weeks away, the Reverend Fathers had a change of heart and decided to recall the students on the condition that they apologized. While Chukwuma's colleagues, including his friend Christian, apologized, the stubborn Chukwuma refused to because he thought he was fighting a just cause. So he was left with no option but to prepare for his school certificates examination from home. He felt betrayed by his colleagues who apologized for an injustice done to them, and he held to the co-ringleaders in absolute contempt for their cowardice. This incident left an indelible impression on him. Chukwuma's parents were considerably disheartened by his expulsion, but he was determined to get good grades so that they would be proud of him. He studied hard for the examination, and while he was waiting for the results, he continued to pore over his books. Unknown to his parents, who were anxious to see him take up a job straight after school certificate examination, Chukwuma was studying for the Army Cadetship examination. He passed both examinations. When his parents opened his mail, they were surprised to see a letter informing Chukwuma that he was called for an interview at the military school. They hoped to dissuade him from joining the army on the advice of Monsignor McCarthy. They kept the letter hidden from him, but Chukwuma soon found out and tried to reason with them. After many days of pleading, begging, and arguing, his parents finally conceded. He went for the interview and subsequent medical examination and passed both. He enlisted as a soldier in training as an officer cadet in the Nigeria Regiment of the West African Frontier Forces in March 1957. After the enlistment formalities, he was prepared for the initial training in the Global Coast, Ghana, for all cadets of the then British West African territories. Chukwuma and his colleagues were moved to Lagos, and from there, they went by road to Accra to begin a 6-month preliminary training program. From there, the best cadets would be chosen to go to England for further training. The training in Accra for serving soldiers and new entrants alike consisted of basic military training in weapon handling, physical training drills, simple battlecraft and staff duties, and all types of operations of war. The training was made up of theory and practice and normally culminated in a 72-hour practical exercise which encompassed all that had been learnt. The program was a test of knowledge, stamina, and leadership and followership qualities. The training was finally brought to an end with another interview of military officers from all the participating countries. By October 1957, Chukwuma had successfully completed his training in Ghana. The training was finally brought to an end with another interview of military officers from all the participating countries. By October 1957, Chukwuma had successfully completed his training in Ghana. His report described him as a conscientious, hard-working, and determined young man who was likely to benefit from an intense military program. He had sealed the hurdle to proceed to Mons in Aldershot and Sandhurst. Training in these prestigious military academies was designed to broaden the cadet's knowledge and outlook by giving him a good grounding in academic subjects in addition to strengthening his military qualities. Knowing his shortcomings, Chukwuma avoided as much as possible the science-related subjects. On the whole, he did well in both the intellectual and physical aspects of the course. In time, Chukwuma attracted attention to himself for his tenacity of purpose, outspokenness, and inquiring mind. The 50s saw the height of the Cold War era between the East and the West. All aspects of training in British military institutions were directed against the Soviet bloc countries. Anyone who expressed an opinion contrary to the prevailing one was immediately branded a communist. For an officer cadet to hold a counter view was regarded with great distrust. Chukwuma was not only very vocal in his view about East-West relations, he even went as far as visiting Hungary in the summer of 1959 to see things for himself. Unknown to him, the British intelligence had been on his trail. Upon his return, he was questioned and stated firmly that he had only gone to Hungary out of curiosity. His visit was never mentioned in any of his reports. He had obviously been dismissed as the genuine desire of a young, inquiring mind for knowledge. Chukwuma completed his military training with average grades. In his first year report at Victory College in Sandhurst, his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Tobel, wrote,
"He has worked well in his first year. No examination figures. Weaker subject is mathematics. Inclined towards superficial grasp of many aspects of a subject, probably due to the breadth of his initial impression here. A confident, mature, and sound cadet. He does not emerge as a leader, but will probably do so among his countrymen. He's always cheerful, an above-average gymnast, and a good trier at most activities."
Chukwuma naturally deplored the obvious condescension and racist bias in the commanding officer's report. But then he was not entirely surprised that he could state it so bluntly, since Chukwuma's relationship with English colleagues was anything but cordial, and the commanding officer knew this. Colonel John Kabore of the Ghanaian Army, who was also in Victory College, Sandhurst, at this time, remembers that Chukwuma did not have close friends among British cadets and openly kept his distance. He avoided social functions and was never present at either of the two balls they had every year, in June and December. According to Colonel Kabore, Chukwuma appeared to have been marked down for his seeming Anglophobia. He could have been an under-officer or cadet sergeant, but he was never appointed because he was too outspoken. At the end of his course at Sandhurst, the same commanding officer now saw Chukwuma in a different light and had something better to say.
"He has thrown himself into his studies wholeheartedly and has improved his knowledge considerably. He has taken a considerable interest in his modern subjects course and has done well. He has good qualities and has made definite progress as an officer in training. I find him very willing to learn and mature enough to accept guidance and criticism. He is rather disappointed not to get his choice intelligence. He will, however, make a good infantry officer, but in view of his wide interest in modern subjects, he should be considered for secondment after he has spent 3 or 4 years as an infantry officer."
Chukwuma had over the years become a truly professional soldier and felt that sentiments had no place in the military. There was an incident which clearly showed what kind of officer he had become. A year after Chukwuma had been in Sandhurst, his friend Christian Anuforo joined him. Christian would have expected to be met at the station, but he wasn't. Chukwuma did not appear for several days until one night he showed up on some kind of official cadet inspection. Christian was overjoyed to see his friend and ran to him shouting, "Kaduna, Kaduna." Chukwuma turned around abruptly saying, "What's your name, cadet?" Christian was completely taken aback, and Chukwuma had to repeat his question before the junior cadet muttered, "Cadet Christian Anuforo." Chukwuma looked straight at him and said goodnight before swinging on his heel. It was the following morning that Chukwuma explained to Christian that official assignments had to be carried out precisely and without emotion. On leaving Sandhurst at the end of 1959, Chukwuma went to Hythe in Kent for a platoon weapons course which would complete his preparation and training as a young infantry officer. He was reported to have worked hard and with great enthusiasm, also showing a confident manner. From Hythe, he went to War Minister on a platoon commander's tactical course as the second arm of the Hythe weapons course. Here again, his report revealed his diligence.
Nzeogwu is a pleasant, cheerful officer who has worked very hard and enthusiastically on the course. He has taken a lively and intelligent interest in discussion periods, and his theoretical knowledge is good. In the field, he has shown stamina and energy and maintained his cheerfulness under arduous conditions. Nzeogwu should make a good platoon commander who has learnt a lot and who will improve with experience.
Chukwuma returned to Nigeria immediately after his young officers' weapons and tactics course to begin what he expected to be a lifelong career in an army raised by the British colonial power, but which was at the point of becoming the national army of an independent, sovereign Nigeria.